This podcast has been made possible by Ledge.
Hello, this is Adam Swisicki, CFO of Brex, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 919.
Company is selling, and this is unusual, selling upmarket very early on. I know with Okta, it took a while to really get some of the bigger companies. With Axonius and the relationships, they are able to get into these companies very early. And as we look at the product offerings that they have, one of the things that's pretty neat about it is it's a platform. And so they're not buying companies to bolt on to add functionality. They're able to do that off the common platform and simply turn on functionality. And so that allows them to expand quite rapidly with even their current install base.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode, we speak with Chris Kramer, CFO of Axonius. Among the different career highlights that Chris Kramer shares with us, perhaps none is as memorable as what might be called his Indiana Jones moment. Having distinguished himself as a technical accountant during the first half of his career, Kramer was often dispatched to observe and scrutinize the accounting practices of prospective acquisition targets in foreign lands. Such was the case one time in the mid-2000s when Kramer entered the UK corporate offices of an acquisition prospect and found himself casting his eyes upon something that he had never seen before. It was incredible, Kramer tells us. A physical ledger, a bounded book, which I then had to translate before I could take it back to corporate. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Does your finance team struggle with routine tasks like reconciliation and manually managing multiple bank accounts? Many tech companies today have complex finance operations and massive amounts of data in different disconnected silos. Whether you're reconciling across 6 different payment processors or between NetSuite and the bank, closing the books can be a nightmare. Ledge has found a better way. Ledge is a finance operations platform that connects all your banking, payment, and accounting systems into one unified platform. Ledge automates revenue reconciliation across all systems, right down to the transaction level, and instantly matches payments, invoices, refunds, chargebacks, or any other transaction. Ledge gives you real-time visibility into your cash position across all accounts and alerts you about issues and at-risk funds in real time so you can act in real time. And get this, Ledge requires no engineering resources. Ledge plugs right into your existing stack so you can get set up instantly. Ledge puts finance teams back in control. Learn more at ledge.co. And hello, we're speaking with Chris Kramer, CFO of Axonius. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Chris, we always begin by asking our guests to look back for us. And what we're looking for are those experiences in your past that you feel prepared you best for this role. When you look back, what comes to mind?
Well, like a lot of accountants and CFOs, I started in Big Four accounting and audit in the Bay Area, and I was very focused on tech. I stayed with tech all the way up through today.
Where were you? You were at Ernst & Young for a while as well as Price Waterhouse, is that right?
Correct. That's correct.
After you leave public accounting, how do you enter industry?
Well, with my move out of Big Four, I went to go work for one of my clients. So I was poached from the client, occurred a little bit more back then because this is the late 90s. This is before the bubble burst. I went to go work for an internet company called eMusic. The bubble burst, and that company did not fare well.
Let's talk about your timing there. You joined them in 1999, and of course, you exit like 2 years later or 3 years later when the bubble was on its last thing.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience where the company went public on, I think it was $99,000 of revenue and $30 million in expense. So not a great business model. They were ahead of their time in certain ways and just not operating effectively.
Now you land on your feet. You move on and you land on your feet. You get another finance role in industry or tech.
Correct. So the next role. So first of all, eMusic was acquired by Universal Music Group. I went to go work for them, overseeing some of their music-related subsidiaries that was housed in LA. After that role, so I separated from that company and moved on. Took some time off, traveled. And then when I came back, I went to go look for a company and landed in San Diego at a company called Sola. It's a lens manufacturer owned by Carl Zeiss. And then I had an opportunity to come up to the Bay Area again. And this was to work for a company called Varian Inc. It was a scientific instrument company out of Palo Alto. Great experience. And that was a little bit more operational in accounting, still within accounting. So it was technical, but broader than I had done previously. And that was a director role. But still, it's still pretty narrow in focus, very technical, not too much operations. And then I got an opportunity to go work for a company called, where was I next? Riverbed. So Riverbed Technology is WAN optimization. Located in San Francisco, and this was a bigger team, more operational, didn't include revenue, but just about everything outside of that, including stock administration, things like that. So great experience, growing company, but it was already public.
Well, along the way, it looks like you had a number of controllership roles, but how did you get more FP&A experience? It looks like you're sort of on the controller accounting track, but we know that there are probably some FP&A projects that allowed you to get some of that skill set as well.
So with Varian, I would say that's where I really learned M&A. They bought a lot of companies, super complex. Some of these companies were a little out of date as it relates to technology and the tools that they were using to manage their books. With one in the UK that I went to go visit as part of that acquisition, I found a ledger, a physical ledger that I had to then translate into something that could be taken back to corporate. It was incredible, something I hadn't seen ever. But there were a lot of companies, big and small, that we acquired. And same thing with Riverbed Technology. It was an opportunity to do significant M&A work, which really expanded my technical understanding of accounting, which was a great experience. It also was a fair bit of travel internationally. Also,
were the M&A assignments, were they in addition to your regular work, or were you brought into the organization knowing you'd be part of this M&A sort of SWAT team that had to?
Yeah, they did know. So my role, I own technical accounting, and so with that, it was at least at Varian, it was technical accounting, stock administration, and then with Riverbed Technology, it included GL and all the other facets of accounting. Once again, outside of revenue, but having that understanding and then doing the M&A work, which is due diligence, as well as the accounting integration, really put some pressure on, do I know it or do I not? And I was successful in that process, and it was a great experience. It's great to go see these companies, understand how they work, how they were built, and then to be able to integrate them into the systems that we're using at corporate.
When you do move on to your next company, is it M&A work as well, or what is the attraction?
I think the attraction is expanded responsibilities. You'll see that as a common theme in this discussion today. Is you have a core base of knowledge that you feel really strong with, but it's the expanding of what you do and what you own that sets you up in a better position to take a higher level role. And that has been true every single time.
Is it a recruiter, though, or is it you using your network as you move along?
I would say it's a little bit of both. Network is extremely important. You want to build great relationships. One, because that opens the door internally to do more, to do other things. And then, obviously, as you move on, you're going to need references. And those often open the door. There were references that opened the door for me at Axonius. Absolutely. And before that, there were references that opened the door for me at Okta. Relationships are extremely important.
Tell us about, Okta. You mentioned you spent 9 years there. You made quite an investment of time. And again, you did, I mentioned the 5 and the 4 years. You're making an investment all along the way. There was the shorter .com episode as well. But tell us about Okta. What was it that kept you there as long as you were there, do you figure?
Well, I think initially it was the leadership. So the CFO was Bill Losh. He came from a chief accounting officer background. He was at, where was he? He was chief accounting officer at Yahoo, then DreamWorks. Took a CFO role at a company called Moby TV for a short term. And then they were acquired. And then he came over to Okta, and he was there for probably 9 months before I came on board. But he was a really good CFO. He listened. He had a very open mindset and allowed his directs to flourish and do well. He was sharp, worked well, and he was easy to learn from. But he also opened the door to do more things. So not necessarily things that I had done in the past, but to learn and grow. And of course, he empowered us to do what we do, to run our groups.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit? I mean, how did he help you grow? I mean, were you primarily in the accounting scheme of things, and he would tug you into other types of projects and what have you, or how does it work?
Yeah, so initially it was your basic accounting. It was pre-IPO company. I think I had maybe four employees, I think, when I started. The company was less than 400 employees. And by the time I exited even the accounting role, there was 100 accountants, and the company was about 6,000 employees. So it was a lot of growth and scale. And so that's where having someone that can provide some check-ins, and bring you back so that you're both aligned with where you're going and what you're doing is really helpful. And he did not have that diminisher trait, which I've seen before with other CFOs. Not ideal. He was really good.
Has it? Did it ever go public, Okta, or what was the?
It did.
No.
It went
what
public.
Year? How long had you been there when it went public?
I was there probably 3 or 4 years before it went public. Very successful IPO. One of the benefits that I had hired someone by the name of Wendy Zhang, who was extremely good, and she helped shepherd the company through the process. So it was between the accounting team, legal, FP&A. We had an all-star cast across the board, and we did a really good job of bringing that company out.
Can you tell us, were any of your earlier companies, did they IPO, or was this the first that you were involved with?
So eMusic, right out of the gate from the firm, that one went public, and then Cyan, which was a software-defined network company, that also went public. So Okta was my third, but by far I was much more involved with Okta, and these are increasing levels, both in role responsibility, but also just engagement.
Tell us something about the 12 months following the IPO, whether culturally the company changed. Was there anything the CFO you saw him do differently in terms of trying to make certain it didn't become a company that was just driven by earnings or what have you? What would you tell us?
Well, that was more of a coordination between the CFO and the CEO. But, a lot of it was managing expectations with the street, making sure that, one, there were no foot faults within accounting as far as recording things accurately and not having any restatements. Absolutely. Another piece is the forecast, right, and providing guidance and making sure that we're conservative. You start off with a beat and raise model and making sure you manage within that. But the company did a great job of managing the street expectations, executing, I wouldn't say flawlessly, but executing well, and then not making mistakes, like big errors. Part of that is setting I would say, not even a policy, but just letting people know that it's okay to make mistakes, but come forward, be honest, be accountable, and let's come up with a solution so that it doesn't happen again. That tone from the top was key to get through that process and then scale subsequent.
When you remain there for years after the IPO, wondering if you didn't start thinking of yourself as a CFO until a few years ago. I mean, when was it that you decided, okay, I need both my feet on this path now? How do I get there? When did that happen to you?
I think, so one, when I was just doing accounting, it was difficult to see how I was going to get the experience needed to be well-rounded enough to become a CFO at a successful company. So when I did get a chance to run FP&A, which was while the head of FP&A was on paternity leave, that's really when it was extremely eye-opening. Not just to the work that's required, but what you get to see from a business standpoint. And it was probably the best experience at Okta that I had, was just simply that short time of being involved, working with the leaders of the company to make sure that they were getting what they needed, proper asset allocation. It was very eye-opening. So that was a great time.
Were you recruited? Did a recruiter ultimately knock on your door?
A recruiter did, but they also had done their background, and it didn't take long to find the contacts. And now part of that process is I was very open when I started to look and started opening my eyes. I had already let the board know that that's what I was going to do, as well as the executive team, because I'd been with Okta for so long that it only made sense to be extremely transparent in any move that I would do. And so by doing that, the audit committee specifically, and some of the board members were open with referrals to go other places, to talk to more people. And that once again, it goes back to relationships. That has really made it a smooth process, both on exiting Okta and then taking on a new role at Axonius.
Tell us about Axonius. We'll jump to the business segment now. Axonius, what does this company do, and what are its offerings today?
Sure. So they are a cybersecurity asset management company. And what they do is they provide visibility, not just in the physical assets, your devices and laptops, but also your applications, your SaaS applications. And so when you think of a security posture, the best way to improve it is to have visibility into who has access to what. Do they have the rights to have access? Is it a managed device or is it not? So I think there's just that visibility on all these different fronts allows a company to be more secure, or at least take action to be more secure in ways that are you just can't do anywhere else. There is no other company that is offering what Axonius does today. There's different point solutions that'll handle certain pieces, but this is much broader and much more effective. So they not only have integrations with 650 solutions, they go deep, far deeper than any other company out there, which makes them a much more compelling offering.
Could you give us perhaps a abbreviated history of its capital structure? I see that it's up to its Series E or what have you. But maybe a short history would help us.
Well, the company was founded by three gentlemen from Israel. They were actually in the same cybersecurity unit in the Army, or it's effectively like our NSA in the U.S. And this unit spits out some of the best cybersecurity people in the world, and these guys know each other. They know the field of cybersecurity experts. And these are the type of guys that have founded a lot of the security companies that we have out there today. And I think you've already rattled off one or two of them. But it is an impressive group. They raised, I think their first raise was with Bessemer. And we talk about relationships. The audit committee chairman of Okta was at Bessemer. So it's a very tight-knit group. And so as I interviewed with Axonius, one of the people I interviewed with was Amit from Bessemer, who's on their board. So once again, very tight. They have gone through numerous rounds, as you mentioned, and the company is really sitting well to go IPO in the coming years, probably pretty soon. I think the market opens and we'll have gotten the the back office accounting, and we'll get the company in order over the next couple of years to go when it's ready to go. But I do believe the market will open and the company will be ready, and this will be a successful IPO in the making.
Now, I know you recently arrived in the CFO office, but we're curious as you look around whether your lines of sight into the organization are everything you hoped. I mean, what are the numbers that you are paying attention to daily now?
Well, cash flow for sure. That's a big one, and margins. So looking for efficiencies. So when we had the pullback in the multiples, and investors were really starting to look at efficiency and margins instead of just revenue growth. It allowed companies, or forced companies in some circumstances, to really take a hard look at how they're spending and become a little bit more efficient, whether that's leveraging strategic sourcing or just cutting back on non-essentials. And I think that's key. Okta went through it, Axonius went through it in obviously a much smaller context. But I think it was good for the company, and as we get that under wraps, which we pretty much have, then it just puts the company in a much better position to focus on growth, but being smart about it.
Are you able to see into the customer relationships? Do you feel confident you have the visibility you need there?
You can always have more visibility. If I have more time, I'll have more visibility. But as it is right now, absolutely. The company is selling, and this is unusual, selling upmarket very early on. I know with Okta, it took a while to really get some of the bigger companies. With Axonius and the relationships, they're able to get into these companies very early. And as we look at the product offerings that they have, one of the things that's pretty neat about it is it's a platform. And so they're not buying companies to bolt on to add functionality. They're able to do that off the common platform and simply turn on functionality. And so that allows them to expand quite rapidly with even their current install base.
We always like to understand whether you're going to reorganize things. And I would imagine it's about getting the house a little more in order. It's about maybe deploying some new technologies to allow the visibility to grow. What would you tell us? What's on your sort of checklist?
Well, first thing I would look at was the business itself, because that is by far the most critical. And I think from a go-to-market perspective, the company is already taking the steps necessary to improve. And they're doing that very quickly, and hiring senior leadership that's been there and done that. That's perfect. The engineering and product, which is primarily out of Israel, they're set. I mean, they could probably use additional resources, and we'll look at that. But by and large, their ability to bring products to market rapidly and successfully is quite impressive for a company of this age and scale. When I look at the G&A functions, and that's HR, it's IT, accounting, finance. Yeah, they probably could use some more work. I mean, we're doing transaction processing in the U.S. when it could easily be done in the Philippines. We have a limited accounting technically, which is not going to scale. And then from an FP&A standpoint, I think we could do a little bit more to support the business internationally. We have 40% of our employees are sitting in Israel doing R&D, and they could be supported better. So I think there are some things that we could do, not massive changes, but certainly adding more sophistication, experience, and then making sure that we're supporting the team and the company overall successfully.
There's something about the first 90 days of a CFO role. Many CFOs would tell us they'd be on a listening tour. Some would tell us they're making a point of just meeting as many people as they can. You can't do it all right away. We have lots of advice for new CFOs. Are you abiding by any of it? What have you adopted as your early 30-day mantra? Yeah.
So not too far off. I do have a 30, 60, 90 day with Dean, our CEO, just to walk through what I've seen, what's on the priority list, and making sure that I'm including what he needs right off the bat. And so a big part of that is one, understanding the financials and whether they make sense from a technical accounting standpoint. And for that, I mean like RevRec and how we're allocating COGS. Because it has a dramatic effect on the financials and how investors will look at us. Two is meeting all the investors. And it's the investors, it's the future investors, it's the buy-side analysts. So there's a lot of IR that I'm doing. And then the third, I would say, is the team and building out the team. I have a strong desire to incrementally bring in the experience needed to go there, to get out, to do an IPO. And we're a long way from that. We have a very small team, not experienced in the IPO process, and I think there's some change that needs to happen.
Excellent. That's helpful. Thank you. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our finance strategic moment question, and this may have happened anytime during the course of your career. But what we're looking for is a moment of insight that you experienced due to your lines of sight into the organization. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
I think the biggest strategic moment, I know we've talked about this a little bit already, was the IPO for a multitude of reasons. The IPO at Okta, which I always knew was a large financing event. It required a lot of work, cross-functionally, legal, IR, finance, accounting, marketing. But what I didn't appreciate up until that point is how important it is for our customers to have that credibility in being able to sell. So I was on the front lines talking to customers at Okta pre-IPO, and it was often really difficult. They didn't understand the SaaS model back then because it was relatively new. They didn't understand how we could be that negative, both on a P&L and cash flow, and somehow come out of it. It didn't resonate well with them. And so spending a lot of time doing that, I think what the IPO did is provided credibility that this is a real company. Investors are backing it, and it's worth trusting, and it worked. So I would say there's obviously the employee liquidity piece too. That's somewhat important, but I would say just the marketing benefit to the sales organization of having a company that's now public is extremely important.
From episode 872, this is 1 Minute with CFO Dan Fletcher. of planful.
I work cross-functionally to develop a market map and understand the trends, historical and emerging in FP&A. And one of those trends, of course, is XP&A, or planning outside of the Office of Finance, planning other than in general ledger codes. And that is inclusive of things like what I mentioned about the SDR team. They plan in number of dials needed to get a connect and how long they're on a phone call. And they resource their group around those metrics. And one of the areas that struck us as very, very ripe for an elevated amount of tooling and education around planning was marketing. So marketing, traditionally one of the biggest cost centers. I think many finance people will nod their heads when I say a bit of a black box, takes a lot of investment, and there's not a great way, at least historically, to understand the return on that investment.
Well, we're going to jump to our mentoring round where I'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and reveal something about yourself to our listeners. We always like to reflect a little bit on the personal side of things. We're wondering if you're known for a personal habit or part of a daily routine. People would point this out and say that, that's just Chris. That's how he does it. He's always done that. I'm not sure why. Anything come to mind when we ask for a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you have?
Yeah, that does come up. I mean, I tell really bad jokes, and these are not jokes.
Are they dad jokes? Or are they?
Yeah, they're pretty much dad jokes, or just what I think is funny at the moment. Doesn't always resonate. I tend to have a dry sense of humor, and people are just staring at me after I say the joke, and then they laugh after I tell them it was a joke. But that's not quite the same. It's not the impact I was hoping for. By and large, from a mentoring standpoint, what I could have used more of was a better understanding of how a broader understanding of the various disciplines within the CFO org would help my career. And so I was very much down the accounting track, then down the chief accounting officer track. But it wasn't until I started speaking to other CFOs, recruiters, and spending more time in seat in these other disciplines that I started to appreciate it. And Okta, I got to spend time in IR doing callbacks with analysts, working on the guide. Obviously, I spent a little time running FP&A just while our head of FP&A was on paternity, who's now the CFO, by the way. And then it was, I moved into FP&A. So I went from having this massive team in accounting as the chief accounting officer to moving in as a SVP of FP&A and having a fraction of the team. So the scope was smaller, and I was focused on areas that I just didn't spend much time on in my current role or my prior role. So areas like recruiting capacity and engineering and product, just areas that I just hadn't really managed. I had a massive budget on my own. I understood the budget process, but it was the business acumen of some of these other areas. That's really where I grew, and understanding the other disciplines, so that as a CFO, I know what they're talking about in FP&A. I know IR. Of course, I know accounting, but in internal audit. But these other areas, they're relatively new, and now I feel like I have a good grasp on all of it.
We wonder if you have a book selection for us. Doesn't have to be a business book. Might be something that's just influenced your thinking along the way, or it might be something you escape with.
Well, most of my reading is the journal, and how I escape is being in nature. So I love to surf and run the mountains around my house, or the hills, I should say, not mountains. So being in nature is really important to me. That's a good way for me to unwind and clear my head.
Are you? Is it long? Are you hiking, or are you running, or walking, or what's your mode of?
These are trail runs. So I run, and it just feels great to be out there, and it's a little bit less monotonous than running on a road.
It's a little quieter, a little less stressful, one would imagine. We're up to our final question where we get to ask you to look forward finally. We're wondering what your priorities are, and you've given these a lot of thought, we know, for the next 12 months as CFO. What would your priorities be as CFO?
Step one, I want to take the team that I have, obviously augment with more experience and new people. But I also want to go a little deeper with the individuals on my team to better understand what are their capabilities, where can they grow, because often employees don't get an opportunity to grow in their current roles and end up leaving for new roles at different companies. I think it's take the time, invest in the team that you have first, and then if you can't get there with them, that's a different discussion. So that would be, as I look forward, it's building out the team. The team is the one that is going to make this work or not. And so it's spending the time and focusing on that team.
Chris Kramer, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.